Good evening. My name is Cameron Towert. I will be going over the cash register project and the UML and code that go with it as well. So getting into the code, I have broken this project into 4 separate classes. One is called main, one is called store cart, one is called payment type, and one is called receipt. And the main class itself, pretty much all it does is just holds the main method, and that just allows me to print and call forth the other classes and objects from those other classes in order to print out everything that's needed to be printed out to the screen. I also have the store cart class, and what this class does is it holds a fixed set of items and a set prices that correspond with those items. And this is the only thing that at the store that a user will be able to purchase. It would then generate a random cart, and from that random cart, it will then calculate the subtotal, tax, and the total of the entire cart itself. And then after that, I've created a payment type class. What this class does is it prompts the user for payment type and the amount they would like to pay with that type. And then it'll continue to loop through until the entire payment of that cart is paid off. It will allow the user to actually input multiple payment types and allow the user to enter multiple payment amounts for a certain type as well if they need to. This class will also calculate change after the end of the transaction if there is any change. And then I've created a receipt class as well. And what this does is it creates a constructor, which will then call the method to print a receipt that is equal to what is seen in the examples that were given in the instructions. So from here, I will move into the main class and I'll go more in depth on each of the classes I move through the main class. So as I move to main class, the first thing that I see or you'll see is the store cart object called cart, which is being created from store cart class. So moving into store cart class, I have decided to use the import java.util.random, and this is to help me create an unknown number of items in the cart and an unknown types of items in the cart as well. So that was the only way I could sort of think about how to work around the unknown number of items, unknown number of things, is just create random carts and then to calculate and generate the subtotal from that, and then have the user go through the rest of the process to define where it prints receipt. So moving into the actual class itself, I've created a final string array called items, and this will hold all of the available items in the store, and that would never change. And then to correspond with the items, the name of the items, I've created a final double array called price. And this will hold all the prices that correspond with the items array. So for instance, apples will be 50 cents, bananas will be 25 cents, a notebook would be $1, and so on and so forth. And these will always consistently correspond with one another throughout this entire process. No would ever change or anything like that. And then the next field that I have is the random object I have created, which I will just go for a little bit further on into the next field, which the next field is an integer I've created called cart number. And this integer will hold the random number of items that is in that cart. That's pretty much what it is. So this object, the random object that I've created earlier, will create or represent a number from 0 to 9, and then it will randomly select one of those numbers, 0 to 9, and then it will store it into cart number, and that number stored in there will be the number of items in a cart. The next field I've created is a string array called cart name, and what that does is it creates a new array equal to the size of the cart number, and this array right here will hold the randomized names of the items in the cart of the random cart generated, and then the next field cart price, which is a double array, will do the same thing for the prices. So as I said earlier, these two will always correspond with one another. So if cart number, or sorry, if apples were randomly selected, then 50 cents will be randomly selected as well with the cart price. Those will always correspond with one another throughout this entire process. And then the final double, final field, sorry, is a double called subtotal, and that's just going to hold the subtotal of the entire cart, which I will then call further into later into other methods and stuff like that, help me calculate more things. So the next, so after the fields, I'll have my first method, and what this method does is it randomly generates a cart, and it'll print the items in that cart. So I was just going straight into what the actual method does, line by line. So the first line does is it initiates a for loop. So it'll continue to loop through this for loop until the it has exceeded the number of items in the actual random cart generated from cart number, as mentioned up here. And then for each time it loops through, it will create another random object called item, and it will store the number of this item into a integer called rand item, and it only store numbers 0 through 7, and that is because of the number of items in my array, which are 8 items in my array for both of them. So as this item gets created, or as this object gets created, and as soon as I initialize and set it to 0 through 7, it'll be stored in random item, and then I will then store that number into random item. I don't know, I just said that again, but I did, I'm sorry. That's my fault. And moving on to the next line, I would then store the random number of from the items array into the cart name array at that index, or at that element. So I would then do the same thing for the cart price with the price array as well. This will then print out the item, the item number, +1 because it starts at 0. And then it will then print the random item that was selected and the price that corresponds with the item as well. So looping through this now, it'll loop through 0 times. So this is the first time loop. It'll create a random number, we'll say random number 1. It'll store number 1 into the item. It'll then go to the cart name element of 0, because we are at 0 currently. It will store item, the items thing at number 1, so 0, 1, it will store banana. It will then do the same thing for cart price. Cart price of element 0, it will store price of element 1, which will be 25 cents. And so it will print out item 1 is equal to, I guess, to bananas, and then the price will be 25 cents. So that's how it works through, and it'll continue to loop through with a random number each time and just generate and grab random items to then create a new cart, 2 new carts. So moving on from that, it will then move into a method called getCart. And what this does, this method is pretty much just to help me with the formatting for the receipt. And pretty much all it does is just, it takes the cart name and the cart price at a certain index, at index 0 through whatever the cart number is, and it prints it out into the format for the receipt. That's pretty much all that does. It loops through for the amount, for how big the cart is. Then the next method calculates the subtotal, and then it what this method does, like I said, it calculates subtotal. So it sets subtotal to 0 just to so everything's fresh and clean. And then loops through, like I said, as through the cart number. So it'll continuously loop through the number of items in the cart until there are no more items in the cart, and then it will set this price to the subtotal, and it'll continuously add the prices into the subtotal of the cart. And then once that is all done, it will then set the field subtotal to the actual subtotal that was calculated here. It then returns a subtotal and returns a subtotal, which will then be used for further calculations down the road into the program. The next method is calculate tax. And what this method does is all it does is it takes the subtotal and it calculates the actual final tax of 0.07 to like I said, to the subtotal. So you'll get the tax total. I created a new variable called double tax, so which will hold the total tax. And like I said prior, it will calculate the subtotal and then it'll multiply that subtotal by 0.07 and store it into tax total. It will then return tax total and then it'll move on into calculating an actual total. And what it will do here is I've created a new double called total. The total will then equal to the calculated subtotal plus the total tax that was calculated prior. It will then return that total. And that is pretty much what the store cart thing does. So moving on into the actual main, we've created the store cart object. We have with that object called the method print cart, which will then print the randomly generated cart and store the randomly generated cart into their corresponding area. So cart name will have, cart name will have all of the items, the randomly selected items into that array, and then cart price will have the randomly selected prices that correspond with that cart into that cart price array as well. So I'm just going to ahead and run it real quick for you. So just to give you a quick example of what it'll look like. So right here we have generated 5 random items. We have generated notebook, which if you look here, notebook is the second element in the array, and then 1, 2 is $1. So it'll always correspond with one another. Item 2, which was randomly generated, are apples. Apples are 50 cents, and here you can see they're 50 cents. Bananas are 25 cents, and here you can see it's 25 cents. And at PlayStation 5, there's 2 of them that were randomly selected, are $400 a piece. So if you go to element number 6, you'll see here right here, $400. So those correspond with one another, and then it calculates the total as well. I'll get further onto this a little bit later and where that comes from, but it also calculates the total, which you can see here. The next part of the line was to create a double call a total, and then it was going to set total to the carts, the cart objects total that was then would have been used to call the from the method calculate total, and then prints out the total in the format that needed to be printed. So just going to go through it one more time. This just creates a cart object, which will then, with that cart object, call the method print cart. Then from there, it'll print out the randomly generated cart. From there, I would then create a total, a double call total. I would then set that double equal to the object carts total, which will be calculated through the method calculate total. I would then print out the total in the format that needed to be printed out according to the directions. So running it one more time, it created 2 random items, curtains and a pencil. The total will be 22,205. So if you use it, 22,205. So that is the total with tax. I would then move on into the code, further into the main class. I'd then have created a payment type object called payment. Moving into the payment type class, this is where a lot of the actual most of the code is actually like centered around. Here I've imported a scanner because we do need to take in the user's input for their payment type and their payment amount, which I'll describe or go further, or I will go into further depth later in the code. I've also imported the array list. And this is because I will have to store individual amounts for each type into an array, so I can um, print out each individual um, payments from that type. So let's go further in the code. I'll describe more of where I went into depth with more of these things listed here. But as I mentioned before, the payment type class, this is just to prompt the user for the type of the payment type they want to use and the amount of each type they want to use. It'll then continue to loop through until it is completely been paid off. Once it's been paid off, it will then calculate the change if there is any change left over. So moving into the actual class itself, I've created a private enumerator called payment method, and I have set 4 different enumerators to cash, debit card, credit card, and check. And these are the only 4 payment methods that users will be able to use while checking out. I would then created a store cart object called cart, which I'll use later in the code, especially primarily I'll be using this for the total and continuously calculating the total until it has been paid off completely. So we'll be seeing more of this a little bit later, and I'll be making mentions back to store cart as well, the store cart class as well. The next field that will be used in this code is total change. It's a double, and all it does is just holds the variable for the amount of change that is left over from the transaction. I now have 4 separate array list fields, and each one do the same thing. They just hold a different amount for the different types of payments that can be held. So this array list, each one of these array lists are doubles, so they'll only hold double amounts. Here I have one set for cash, and this will be used to only hold the amount each payment made with cash. And then I have the next one, which is debit, and it will be used generally the exact same way, except it'll hold each payment for the amount of times debit was used. Each separate payment, the amount of time each debit was used. So if someone pays with debit $200 for debit once, and then they use $50 for debit twice, then it'll hold 200 and it'll hold 50. And then I'll be able to loop through and print those elements out as I need. I've created another one. The other array list double is for credit, and another one is used for check as well. So these are all relatively the same thing. They just hold different amounts for the different payment types that are available to the customer. Moving into my methods, here's my first method. The first method is called set total change. And what this method will do is it will take in a double called total. It will take in the total amount of the entire cart. And then it'll determine if the total is less than 0. And if the total is less than 0, then I'll multiply it by -1. So it'll print out a positive number saying, hey, the store itself is losing this amount of money, but the customer is gaining this amount of money. So it'll print off in the way that needs to print off according to the instructions or the format instructions for this project, that the change will not be in negative, it will be in positive. So and then if the total is greater than or equal to the change, it sets the total change to total. So this is just to set total change of the transaction if there is any change, and make sure that the actual change itself is positive for the customer's view and format. This is a getter method, and what this method does is it gets the total change, so it turns the total change, which is up here, which will be set by this after this program runs, this class runs. I then have a setter called set cash amount. And what this does is it sets a cash amount equal to the payment amount. It sets the cash amount for each element in the double array, the double array list called cash amount, equal to the payment amount. So getting actually into the code itself, cash amount, which is this array list object up here, it will, sorry, I lost my script. It will add an element as 0 to equal to 0.0. And then what this loop for, it will then run through a for loop. This for loop will then run through the amount of elements in the um, cache amount object size. It's the size of the cache amount object plus one. So it'll constantly be running until there's nothing else to really run, if that makes sense. So what this will do, well, it runs to the size of the element, and will constantly open up a space for another cache element to be added into that array list. And it'll run through it until it's been paid off, and then there's nothing more to use. So inside this for loop, it'll check if the cache amount at the current element is greater than or equal to 0.0. If it is, it'll add that amount to, it'll add the payment amount passed in to the cache amount array list. It will then break from this, and then it'll continue through until it needs to be called again. And then I have a getter called get cache amount, and it returns a array list double. So it returns an array list of double, and it'll be returning the cache amount array list. I then have a set debit amount getter or setter, sorry, called set debit amount, which passes in the double variable payment amount, which will it essentially does the exact same thing as the set cache amount setter. So what it does is at the array list element 0, 0, it creates 0. It creates it creates and sets an element at 0 of 0.0. It will then loop through the size of the debit amount array plus one, so it's able to constantly add another element to that array. It will then check if the debit amount at the current element is greater than or equal to 0.0. If it is greater than or equal to 0.0, it will then add a new element equal to the payment amount passed in. It will then break from it, break from this thing, right? It will then break from this, and then it'll continue running through until it needs to be called again. I then have a getter called get debit amount, which will return a array list double, and this one will return the array list debit amount. I then have another setter that does the exact same thing as the last two setters, set debit amount and set credit amount. It is a setter that passes in the double payment amount, which will then, first thing it does is it creates a new element at 0, and it sets it to 0.0. And then loops through the entire size of that of the credit amount array list. Plus one, so it's constantly, like I said, prior to able to add another element as it goes, if need be. Sorry, and then it will check just to make sure that the element at 0 at the element at the current sorry, it will check to make sure that the element of index I at the current array list credit amount is greater than or equal to 0. It will then set credit amount to the payment amount if this check is true. It will then break from this and then continue on until it needs to be called upon again. I now have a getter method called get credit amount, which returns an array list double, like the last two getter amounts or getter methods. And this array list double, it will return array list double, and then it returns the credit amount array list in this getter. I then have my final setter. This setter is called set check amount, and it passes in a double payment amount, and it has done like all other setters, the last three setters, and it will do the exact same thing. As soon as it gets called, it creates a new element at 0 equal to 0.0. It then loops through the amount of the check amount size or size array list, the check amount array list size plus one, so it could be constantly able to add another element if it needed to. It will then check if the element at the current element at check amount array is greater than or equal to 0.0. If it is, it will then add the payment amount equal to the current check amounts array or element. It will then break from it and continue on until it needs to be called through again. Then I have my final getter, and this getter will return an array list double. And this array list double is called get check amount, and this will return the check amount array list from that. And then I have the print payment method. This method, all it will do is it prints out the options for the user to select from. So if I just hit run, it prints out the options for the user to select from. So moving on into the user choice method, this passes in the double total, and what that does, it allows the total to actually be the total item of the cart to actually be stored and used, so we can constantly calculate new things and continue to make sure that the entire total has been paid off. So first thing we have is a final double cart total. This integer this final integer or double right here is used to store the total amount of the cart. That way we can always have something to compare back to as we're continually altering the total double being passed in. So here I've also created a integer called user choice. This will store the integer for whatever the user has selected from these choices here, 1, 2, 3, or 4. I've created a new scanner object call choice, and what this will do is it will take in the keystrokes from the user's keyboard as they're typing in their options, and it'll store it into choice. I've created a double integer called payment amount, and this will store the amount that the user wants to pay with the option that I've selected. I've created a scanner called amount as well, and this will store the keystrokes in as well. It will do the exact same thing as scanner choice. It'll store it'll take in the keystrokes from the user using the system.in, and it'll store it into the amount. The double amount variable I have declared above. I've then created an object from payment type. I've then also created a payment enumerator, from payment method called paymeth, and then I have printed the print. I've called using the payment object that was created and I've used the stop for a second. I have used the object from P, and I've called upon the method print payment, which would then print the payment options for the user. I've then prompted the user to select or enter the payment type, which I've done here, which I've then used the scanner object choice to take in the user's taking the user's choice, and then it will store it as an int, and then store it into user int, or take it as an int and then store it into user int. So the user's choices will be stored as ints. So if they select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, even though the keystrokes are being taken in, I think it's string objects or string variables, they will then be converted into integers and then stored into the user choice as an int. I then have a while loop, and what this while loop does is it'll continually loop, and as this total here is being constantly updated further down in the code, if it is less than or equal to the cart total itself, it will then constantly be looping until the total has been paid off, which will get down further down here. So Getting into the actual while loop itself, I have a switch called user choice, and it takes in the user choice. And in case one, which will be if the user selected one, it will then set the enumerator pay method into actual numerator, the choice cache. So it stores that as a cache. It stores it as cache. It will then prompt the user for the amount they would like to pay with this type. It will then take that amount that is being selected through the scanner object amount. It'll transcribe it into a double, and then it will store it into the payment amount integer, which I've, or yeah, sorry, double variable, which I have declared up here. It will then use the method set cash amount to the payment amount, which was declared up here. And as I said earlier, it loops through and will store that individual what was entered during that time from payment amount. It will store it in that, and then it will be passed over into the set cash amount method, and then stored in the element of the cash amount array or array list. So going on from there, it then sets the payment amount into an element of the cash amount array list, as I said. It'll then calculate the total, and it'll take the current total that was being passed in, and it'll subtract it from the payment amount that was entered, and it'll store that into the total itself. It'll then print out the total after payment, and it'll break from this, and then it will determine whether or not it needs to break from the while loop, break from the code in general, or if it needs to calculate the change, which I'll get further down to a little bit later as I go through the rest of the cases. Case two, if the user selected number two, it'll set the enumerator to debit card, which is one of the only options. It'll then print out, print out prompt the user for the amount that they want to use with this type. It'll then set the payment amount equal to the whatever the scanner object took in, make it into a double, store into the payment amount double field or variable that was declared above. I would then call the method set debit amount, which will take in the payment amount. It will then take it'll then set the payment amount to an element that is not being used currently in this debit amount array list. It'll then calculate the total. It'll take the total, current total. It'll subtract that payment amount from it, and it'll update the total. It'll then print out the brand new total as it goes through, and then break from the choice. Case three does the exact same thing as case two, except it's 1 and 2, except it sets the payment method to a credit card. It'll then prompt the user for the amount to pay with that type. It'll then update the payment amount. It'll with the amount scanner object, it'll then take whatever's typed in, convert it to a double if it can, and then it will set that to the payment amount double variable declared above. It'll then update the total by taking the current total, subtracting it from subtracting the payment amount that was entered from it, and then updating the current total to be continually processed. It'll then call the method set credit amount, which will pass in the payment amount entered. It'll then update the credit amount array list and store that payment amount into that array list, into an element of that array list. It'll then print out the new total calculated from this current entry. It'll then break from it and then continue down to the code down here and loop through what's more. As I said, I'll get a little bit further into this once I get through the rest of the switch. And I'll also give an actual demonstration of what should happen as you go through it. So case 4, it does, if the user enters the number 4, it'll set the payment method to check, or the numerator to check. It will then print out or prompt the user for how much the user wants to pay with this amount or with this type, and then it'll take in the user's keystrokes with the amount or the scanner object amount. It'll then convert those keystrokes into a double and store that into the payment amount double variable, which was, as I said, multiple times declared above. It'll then call the set check amount method, which will then take in the payment amount that was entered. And it will then set it into an element of the check amount array list. It'll then calculate total. The total will take the current total. It'll subtract the payment amount entered from it, and then it will update that current total to the total variable. Excuse me. It will then print out the current total after it's done and then break from this. If anything other than 1 through 4 are entered, the default option will be it'll go through the default option and it'll prompt the user or tell the user that they enter a valid number of 1 through 4. It will then reprint the payment options available to that user and then break from this and then continue through the while loop. Once this switch has been gone through at least once, whenever it breaks, it'll then fall to this check. And this right here will check if the total is less than or equal to the cart total and make sure the total is greater than 0. If that is true, then it will continuously prompt the user for for another payment type and then go through that choice again. So it prompts the user for the payment type again, and then it'll take in whatever the user choice is. Whatever the user decides, it'll take that choice into the choice object. Choice scanner object, convert it to an AMP, whatever they put in, if it is able to be converted, and store it into the user choice, and then continue through the for loop. If the total is less than or equal to 0, however, it will calculate the total change by passing in a total, the double total variable, and then it'll then break from this entire loop, which will then go further deeper into the main method. So if I were to actually run this code and actually utilize what has been offered, so all this has been printed through the store cart, class, and what was called in the method from here to here, from line 16 to 20. From here to here is everything in the payment type class, and it is from lines, has been called by utilizing lines 20 through 22. In the payment type, it pretty much, where this is currently, is this. These lines from here to here. Actually, sorry, I'm actually from here to here because I'm not entering anything yet. So if I were to come here and actually enter, I'll enter 1. Hit enter the amount to pay with the type. So from here, it'll go through the while at least once. It'll take in my user choice, which I just entered as I entered 1. It'll then go to case 1 since I entered 1. It'll set the numerator to cash. And as you see here, as prompted me to enter the amount to pay with this type, which is right here. I will then, using the amount scanner object, whatever I enter, if it is a double, will be passed into the payment amount. So I'm going to enter the total is $299.11. I'm going to enter $200. Enter that in. It will then update the payment amount. It'll then go through. It'll set the payment amount to a element in the debit amount array list, and it will then calculate the total, which it did. So 399.11 minus 200 is indeed 199.11. And it updated that. It then printed out the total after the amount. It then broke from this. The normal one. It'll set the cash amount to the. It'll set the payment amount to the cash amount array because I entered cash. That was my fault. and it goes to all this, and it'll break from this, from case one, go all the way down, and then it will determine if this needs to be continued to ask. And since the total is still greater than zero, it will then prompt me to enter another payment type, which I have right here. The next thing I enter will be stored into will be anything I enter using the choice object, scanner object, has been converted into the int, if it is applicable, and then stored into the user choice variable. So as I do it here, enter user choice, I'm going to enter in 6. And as you see here, it went all the way back through, saw user choice, saw there was no 1, 2, 3, 4, there was no 6, went to the default, told me that I needed to enter a valid number of 1 through 4 right here. And then it prompts me again using the print payment method in the payment method class on the P object created through the payment method class. Please enter payment type. Since there was no change and total is still greater than 0, no change in total, it will then continue to ask me to enter another payment type, which I will and then enter. Let's do debit card this time, so I'll enter 2. Hit enter. Stored user choice equal. It took my keystrokes using the choice scanner object. Took it as a converted to an int and stored it in the user choice variable. It will then loop back through, tell me, it would then loop back through the while, since the total is still less than or equal to the cart total. It will then prompt me through the user choice. Since I chose 2, it stores the pay method numerator as a debit card. It will then enter the amount to pay with this type, which is where I'm at now. The next thing I enter will be entered and taken in with the amount scanner object, taken as a double, stored into the payment amount variable. So I have $199 left. Let's say I enter 199 exactly, and I have 11 cents left over. So it called the method set debit amount, stored whatever I put in as a payment amount, and then and an element in the debit amount array list. And then calculate the total once more. So it took the current total, which was 199.11, subtracted my payment amount, which I put in as at 199, and updated the total, which is now 11 cents, or 11,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,0 saw that my total still over zero, over the number 0. It's now prompting me again, and anything I enter will be taken in with the choice scanner object, converted to an int and stored in the user choice. So let's do that. Please enter payment type. I'm going to enter 4 because who doesn't like using checks to pay 11 cents. I will then enter 12 cents, or actually I'll enter $1, and then it'll calculate it. Saw that it was saw that that was all that needed to be paid for. It was completely paid with. Since total was less than 0, total after payment was less than 0. It was negative 0.89 cents. It set total change, so it went and called the method set total change, passing the total value, that is the current total value, and then calculated the change, and then it broke from this, and then that's where we are now. And that is all, everything inside the payment type class. Sorry, a lot of this stuff is choppy. It's sort of weird talking about your code, but that was a payment type class. I know that was long. I know that was dreadful, but we're on the last class now, which is the receipt class. And what this class does, this class, as I said, at the beginning of the code introduction was this class will create a constructor, and then it'll call a method that will then print a receipt equal to the format of what was desired in the instructions. So moving into the receipt class, again, I've called the array list package in order to get that, in order for me to loop through all of the cash amount array list, the debit amount array list, the credit amount array list, and the check amount array list as well. So I can print out the individual amounts paid with each type for the amount of time that it was paid with that type. So moving to the receipt class, the first thing I have is just a default constructor. There's really nothing special about it. You just call it, it'll create a constructor. This is probably not even needed, really, to be honest, but I created it just in case I needed something later down the road to update a receipt, and I can actually add it in there. But right now, all it does is create a string item or a string variable called result, and it just puts a space in there. That's all it does. Nothing fancy, nothing special. Which in the main thing is all it does here. Here I am calling a receipt or creating a receipt object, passing nothing in, which passes nothing in here. And then all it does is just creates a string variable called result with a space as in the string. Here I do, however, use the string constructor to call a method called print receipt, which takes in the store cart object called cart as created up here, and the payment type object called payment, which is created up here. So cart is being passed in through here, which is called up here, and then payment, which is being passed in, is called up through from here. So going back into the receipt class, what this does is it creates a method. This method will then take in a store cart object and a payment type object. Inside this method, however, I've created an array list double called cash. And what this will do is it will use the object passed in, use the get cash amount method, which will call the cash amount array list from the payment type class. It'll then set that equal to the cash array list, which was created above. And I do this for each individual payment methods. So I do one for double. I create a double array list called debit. I then set that debit equal to the debit array list, or the debit amount array list in the passed in payment type object, utilizing the get debit amount method. I do the same thing for credit. I create an array list double called credit. I then, utilizing the payment type object, I call the get credit amount the method, which will then get the credit amount array list, store it into the credit array list, which was created up here. And I do the final array list I do is for the check. I create a array list double called check. I then, utilizing the payment type pay, which was passed in, payment type object pay, which was passed in, I will then call the method amount. I'll call the get check amount method, and then using that method, it pulls the array list check amount from the payment type class, and then it will then store it into that array list, into the check array list. Here now I have these array lists, which I can now loop through. They all have the same types or the same amount as the payment amounts that were passed in through the payment type object. Here I create a new object, or with the object that's passed in, I get a cart. So this right here, it pretty much gets the formatting for the cart. So if we go into store cart, and then the public void get cart, and then this, all this does is it allows um, the cart to be generated in the format that needs to be generated for the receipt. So it loops through the amount of items in the cart, the total number of items in the cart, and then prints out the uh, the uh, the current cart item name at the current index of I, which is from 0 to cart number, and then it is, or less than cart number, sorry. And then it'll also tab over using this and create and then print out the price of that item at corresponding with the cart name. So you can see here, curtains, $20.50 as up here. Curtains, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 20, 50. They will correspond with one another, always. Bananas and 25 cents. They will always correspond with one another. So this is what that does. All that does is it just prints the actual it just prints the pretty much the items that were in the cart and the price with them and selected in the proper format for the receipt. I then just print out a dotted line just to help separate from these are all the items that you have selected. This dotted line, all it does is just a separator. It separates it from the subtotal, tax, and the total, which the next line is it prints out the subtotal. It prints out the subtotal. It tabs it over until, and then it will also print out the subtotal from the actual cart. So it'll print out 373, which if you add all this up, it will equal to $373. Sorry. It then prints out the tax and tabs has the proper indentation, and then to keep everything in line, nice and even down here. And then it will print out the cart's total tax. It will then print out the total, indent as it needs to, and then print out the cart's total. Excuse me. The cart total is supposed to be offset by 1 from the subtotal and the tax. These are supposed to be in line. This one's supposed to be offset. I then loop through the entire array list for cash. I loop through the entire array for cash. If the cash.getI is greater than 0, there is something actually there, 0.0, sorry, it will then print out cash and then the current index of where that cash is at that element, at element I. So first one we'll loop through. As you can see here, the first payment I made was $200 for the I. So please enter payment type. First thing I entered was cash. I entered $200. It looped and it stored $200 in the first index, which it looped through. Saw there was only one item in this array list, and then printed cash. And so only one item in the cash array list, and then it printed the cash for that. This will this for loop does the same thing for debit size. So it loops through the entire debit size array, the size of the array list debit size, or debit. I'll then check to see if the current index of I is greater than 0, 0.0. If it is, it then prints out the debit, the amount of, or the payment amount of that current use of debit. It'll continue to print out until there are no more elements in the debit array list. So I continue to do this for the credit as well. Whatever the credit size, credit array list size is, it'll loop through that amount of times until I is greater than or equal to until I is equal to the size of the credit array list. It'll then check if the current index of element I, if the current element of index I of the credit array list is greater than 0, it'll then print out credit dot get I. it'll print out the credit, and then at whatever index at credit, whatever element at credit whatever element I is at credit is under the credit array list. I do this for check as well. Look through the size of check. I then check to see if the current element of check is greater than 0.0. If it is, it then prints out the words check with the proper indentation, and then the element of check, or the current element of the check array list. And the final line of this receipt, the print receipt method is it prints out the change. And what it does is it it then takes in the passed in payment type object pay, and then it will then call the method get total change, which will then call this method right here, which will get the total change, which was calculated at the very end of the user choice method right here. Once it gets that, it will then print out the total change of this transaction, which right here was supposed to be rounded up to 89 cents. So I'm going to run through the program to show you from start to finish, and show you the multiple ways that people can enter payment types and how they are stored and printed on the receipt. So I will now run the program once more. I've created 5 random items. I have created a television worth $350.75, a banana worth 25 cents, a vacuum which is $25.25, another vacuum which is $75.25, PlayStation 5 which is $400. The total with tax is $964.61. Then the program then prompts me for enter payment type. I'm gonna hit 1. I'm gonna pay with cash. I'm gonna pay $200. I realize I have more cash in my pocket. I'm gonna hit 1 again. I have pull out $125 more. I would then be like, all right, cool. I've used all the cash on me. I have a checkbook. I use a check. I don't really feel like hoping my check doesn't get bounced or whatever. So I'm just going to use $100. I don't think my check should be bounced. So I'll then use my debit card. So I'll enter payment type 2. I would then say, I feel like using $500 off my debit card. Cool, I use $500. I have a total left of $40. I'm going to, oops, I accidentally entered the wrong key stroke. It then prompts me and tells me that, hey, yo, you need to enter a valid number. Here are the options again, you idiot. So I would then use a credit card, and I will use the remainder of the card. I'll just go and use $50 off the credit card. Overkill, yes, I know, but it is whatever. So as it went through, so the total payment, this should be my change. It tells me that I have a negative balance now, so meaning I should be getting money back. That is now the new total. It is less than 0, so it ended that. Like I said, it ended. Since it's less than 0, it broke from the entire thing, and it just stops running and moves on to the next thing in the main. Create receipt. The receipt has been created. First thing it's called is the actual items that you have purchased on the receipt. So we did purchase a television, a banana, 2 vacuums, and then PlayStation 5. So we scroll up. Television, yep. Banana, yep. Vacuum 1, yep. Vacuum 2, yep. And then PlayStation 5, yep. All those items are on our receipt. That's what we have purchased. We calculate the subtotal, which if we add this up ourselves, 350.75 plus 25 plus 75.25 plus 75.25 plus $400 does equal indeed $901.50. I don't know if you can see that. Not with the light. Boom. Right there. So that is correct. I'll then calculate the tax. I'll multiply 901.5 times 0.7 as it does in tax. So took the subtotal 905.1.7 and multiplied 0.07, and I got 63.105 here, 63.105 after I've taken 901.5 and multiplied 0.07. As you can see here on the code, that is roughly what we got. I don't know where the extra 4 came from, but hey, it's there. So adding those together, so 901.5 plus 63.105 does indeed equal 964.605. Right there. So the math checks out on that. So everything in the store class does work properly. And this is what was printed from the receipt class. So as we go through now, it will then loop through and determine how much money was spent on how many times you have spent cash, and then it'll print the cash that you used to spend with each individual transaction you used for cash. So the first time we used cash, it was here. Yep, and we did use $200, and we did spend $200. The next time we used cash was the next transaction-ish, and then we used $125, and here we have $125. So the 2 times that we use cash are printed separately. I then use debit once right here, and then it does say that I put $500 in for debit, and that checks out as well. Debit, we did use $500. Credit, I used $50, so we'll check that real quick, make sure that is good as well. I think I used credit right here, enter payment type 3, credit, and then I entered $50, which you see right here. And then the final thing we used was check. I used $100 for a check, which is right here. We did use 4 is a check, and then $100 is what we use for a check, which is as you see. And since the balance up here was negative, meaning this should be able to change, since it is less than 1 or less than 0. Since it was multiplied by 1, we do have a positive change of $10.40, which was calculated in this area here. Since since the total put in was less than 0, it didn't multiply by -0.1 or by -1, so it gave out a positive value. And then that is the end of the code, everything runs, and that is exactly how it needs to be, or it's exactly how the examples look. So that is all for the code itself. It runs exactly how it was intended to. I was not 100% sure if the when generating the cart, if I needed to actually create a random cart, I did anyways, just to be safe. I don't know if that's going to mess with y'all's code. I don't know if we're actually going to run this in general, but and through another code just to test everything. But I created a random cart each time. It does work every time, as I've proven a couple of times. So the receipt and stuff like that should match the format that you anticipated or wanted, and then everything that is printed here from here down should be able in the format as well. So now that I've gone through the code, I'll now go through the UML, which I will then show on here. And this is my UML. So pretty much here's the main class. This class pretty much instantiates everything. So as you can see in this, it does call a store cart and creates that object, and then it calls a method using that object. Actually calls multiple methods using that object. It calls the print cart method, and it calls calculate total method. So here it instantiates. It creates a method with all this, or creates an object, sorry, that utilizes a lot of these fields, and then it calls the print cart method and the calculate total method as well. So, sorry, the print cart method it calls, and then the calculate total method it calls as well, which is then stored, and then this variable will get stored in total in the main, which is in the main method, then gets passed to the payment type, which it does. The next thing it calls is a payment object called payment, and it then calls the payment, and it calls the method user choice utilizing the payment type. So it does create a object, instantiates it, and then it calls the method user choice, passing in the total double, which was calculated using the total double, the calculate total method from the store cart object. And then the final thing that the main method, the main class in the main method does is it creates a receipt object called REC, and then it uses the method print receipt, passing in the cart object that was created and the payment or in the payment object that was created from the payment type as well. Passes those two objects in respectively, and then prints out the actual receipt. So moving on to the actual payment, the payment type class can't really exist without the store cart. So you can't really pay for something if you haven't put something in your cart, if that makes sense. If you haven't had something, any type of transaction, then you can't really have a payment type. Like you can't actually prompt somebody for a payment, prompt somebody for a payment type. You can't do any of that. And so you can generate a blank receipt though. If someone has a null purchase or void purchase, they can print a blank receipt. So these two are directly related to the receipt class is directly related to the payment class and the store class. And it sort of seems like everything sort of revolves around the store class. Granted, which sort of makes sense because if you don't have a cart, and you don't have people in there buying stuff, then you can't prompt people for payments, and you honestly can't prompt generated receipts that actually have the stuff that was paid for and stuff like that. So in general, this is UML. I wasn't really sure how in depth it needed to be with the UML, but this is what I got with it. I'm not exactly 100% sure if this is what y'all were expecting, but this is the UML that I created, and this is the entire cash register project that I have that I'm going to submit. So this is everything. The UML it will be submitted separately. This will be and then the code itself, the actual code and the and the source packages will be submitted as a zip file, and then the video will be submitted as well. So that is all for this video. I hope this is correct. I hope this is what y'all were looking for and what y'all wanted. I appreciate y'all for actually taking the time to actually watch this probably very, 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 very long video and watch me work my way through this code. I had never talked about code before. I've never had to describe my code like that and break it down to the T. So I appreciate y'all's patience. I appreciate y'all's time, and I hope that you'll have a good rest of your day. Thank you, and goodbye.